Ooh, should I pause the recording for right now?
Yeah.
Start the recording again. And we're kind of just going to get into it. So, like I mentioned before, like I posted a couple stories on my Instagram story a few days ago, and it was like a set of questions targeted specifically at like my white friends. But I wanted to have these be a little bit more open ended, really just to like get the conversation going. And I teach, I used to teach at USC. I used to go out and teach in local classrooms about political economy and like things like that. And one of the things that really came up was equity, access, and equal opportunity. And so I really just wanted to start off by asking the whole group if you feel that everyone in this country is given an equal opportunity to be successful, and why not, whatever you're thinking. I'd really like to hear anybody's point of view on that. If you unmute, like you can just press the space bar and then you like temporarily unmute yourself, so that can be kind of helpful. But if anybody has any thoughts on that, or I could pull a seventh grade teacher and cold call somebody, that'd be shitty.
I'll go. I say absolutely not. For like those obvious reasons. Race and like the family you're born in, the zip code you're born in, like your parents' values, religion, skin color, and everything like that. So, do you want me to be more in detail or what?
Yeah, you can keep going if you want to keep going, or if somebody else wants to jump in about like their own personal experience that they felt like there has been an equal opportunity or there hasn't been. If anybody wants to go off that.
I guess I'll say something. Yeah, no, I think the answer is absolutely not. Again, like you, I was in a lot of schools during my time at USC teaching. During fall of 2016, on the next day I had to go teach a civics class full of people who were all Black and Hispanic, and it was a very scary moment to try and explain to them what this means for them. But yeah, people absolutely do not get the same opportunity. I think there's never been a large orchestrated proactive movement by the country to try and give out these resources. Every time we try and like pass legislation, it's very generic and doesn't actually do anything. And we've never, as a white community, taken the time to listen to the needs of what they really need to get that opportunity.
Yeah, I think kind of to go off of that, like speaking of as a person of color, but not necessarily somebody who's directly affected in the same way as Black and Latino people are, specifically by the institutional oppression that exists. Like, I think it's really important that, like, I guess me specifically, I don't really mind deferring and like allowing people who like don't actually have that voice. Like, I want them to have the opportunity to speak forward because I feel like kind of being given the opportunity to be perceived as like this model minority, like it's kind of like this myth that a lot of people have adopted, whether you're Asian or Indian. And like a lot of people consider themselves to be, same as white people. So when I grew up in school and I just felt like, oh, I'm just the same as the white kids because I'm being treated exactly the same as the white kids. But then sometimes you're also given those like negative factors of like, oh, I get stopped on the side of the street because like I'm really dark and people, might mistake me for some other stuff. But at the same time, it's like I'm given so many privileges for looking the way that I do, but then also it's like kind of that mixed dynamic. But I would kind of wanted to hear more your guys' perspectives, give people who don't actually have the voice the opportunity to voice what their issues are, kind of, because I feel like that like plenty of people have been able to talk that are white people and they monopolize that, and like the conversation is not necessarily being given to people that don't have a voice. So I feel like this is a great opportunity to allow that to happen.
Thank you. Well said. I think kind of going off that, then like a question that I think has come up a lot is like, do we feel like we've made any actual progress? Like if we think back 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, like there's certain legislation that we can point to, that we may be able to say like, okay, there might have been an example of progress. But I've heard some very differing opinions on whether or not we feel like, has there been any actual progress? Do we feel like things are getting more equal, or do we feel like we're getting more divergent?
I I feel like as I'm in a like predominantly white community, and I feel like something that would have indicated real substantial change would be a, a change in the occurrence of how common it is for people to talk about how surprising it is to see people of color in specific places or specific areas. Or take Greek life at my university, for example. Like, it's rare that I see people of color come through the doors during recruitment or during networking events and things like that. And I feel like if there was real tangible change, that shock factor wouldn't be so present. And even if it's kind of a sublime feeling, it's still there. And that indicates that there's some persistence of a lack of diversity. And yeah, that's just kind of a small example, but
I think the sorority example is a really good example. I guess for those of you that have participated in Greek life, how have you felt that that has, changed your experience or, altered your perspective in terms of like, have you experienced that it's surprising, to see a Black girl in a sorority or a Black person in a frat? Do you ever question like why that is the case?
I can speak to this again. I feel like there's different kind of Greek organizations that are like more culturally based. And part of me thinks like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like, we're creating these communities based on culture for other people. But then there's kind of a smaller thought of, is this just segregation on a club level? Like, why? I don't know.
You're muted,
Marcus, you're muted.
Yeah, I just realized that. That's an interesting question. Do we think that it's like just segregation on a club level or like at an organization level, like in our universities?
Well, I went to university in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is by some standards one of the most segregated cities in the country. Community segregation, but also organizational segregation. I felt like people of color were not welcome at Marquette generally, and people of color were certainly not welcome in Greek life.
Well, I'm kind of curious. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but this is my cousin William. He also goes to Boulder. But Boulder, kind of Maggie was speaking about the sorority experience in Boulder. But I'm curious, like for you, being a Black person on a predominantly white campus, have you felt that that community has been, is that something you actively choose to steer clear of? Or do you feel like, they make active efforts to try and, or is there like some sort of set of actions that you do to either involve yourself or de-involve yourself in that community?
It's tough because there are players on my team who are in Greek life, and they're all white players, and then it's kind of clicked up really still, and I wouldn't say segregated, but there are definitely cliques of like white players who go to Greek life events, and Black players who just hang around other Black players, and Polynesian players who will hang out with Black players because they find more identity hanging out with people of color. So really the football team and basketball team are like a large amount of the Black student population at CU. So we stick together. And then as far as Greek life, occasionally we'll go to like a frat party and whatnot, but it's not something we just do on the regular.
So I guess my question for people that are involved in Greek life, and we won't stay on this like too long, but my question for people who are involved in Greek life is like, have you seen in your experience at all any type of diversity initiative? Like is there any type of like educational aspect or any type of active effort to try and include or have people of color participate?
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. So at least at USC, there's what's called the Diversity and Inclusion Award. So it's like part of the Greek Awards every year. And like Alpha Chi has won it the past couple of years, and that's probably the only reason I know about it. But in terms of like education and active effort, I personally haven't seen anything. I know there are girls of color in my sorority, and in pretty much everyone there's a few, I guess. I would say predominantly Eastern Asian, like that in terms of people of color. In terms of African American girls, I think there's 3 in my chapter of 120 something. And you like when you go through the recruitment process, you don't see that many like girls that are black. Like you don't. And I personally, I did question that when I was going through recruitment. Like that was a thing that came through my head, was just why. And I guess I don't really have a good answer for that, other than I know that we have like a diversity chair in our house, but as to what they actually do, there's not a whole lot there.
I'll kind of add to that. I feel like, I mean, at Boulder, our Panhellenic Council made like a statement about everything that's going on, which is awesome that they're standing in solidarity. But I agree that on a day-to-day kind of organizational level, there's not a lot of education and there's not a lot of resources being provided. And I'm also in Alpha Chi, so hey. But our philanthropy as Alpha Chi's is domestic violence awareness. And that's an issue that predominantly affects people of color, like disproportionately. And outside of like a presentation in a class, that's not something that's ever come up in any of our workshops or just educational materials about how to best support our philanthropy focus. And like that's kind of a huge deal, especially now. Like I know that that's an action that I could take of reaching out to, you know, our headquarters and saying, hey, let's implement information about this in all of our educational materials, because these are things that we're handing out on campus. It's conversations happening in our chapters. Even like when we're on the ground and volunteering with, you know, our local organizations, we're not talking about who's going to be there. And I feel like that is a massive part of just what we're doing, and part of being like, so for my training to volunteer directly at our safe house here in Boulder, the whole training was centered from a trauma-informed approach. And within that, we talked a lot about privilege, and we did some exercises to kind of check our privilege and things like that. But those aren't things that are crossing over with the organizations that are helping out locally, and specifically being our chapters. And something that I think I was aware of, but I'm learning a lot about, is just that being a person of color means being in a state of trauma a lot of the time. And so if you're not taking that trauma-informed approach, are you really taking any informed approach? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said about like checking your privilege, in that has to be a mindset that you carry with you, like when you approach new situations, trying to implement like new things. So I guess this is another question for the general group and specifically for the white people, but this is a question I encourage you to think a little bit more deeply about. But how do you feel like you benefit from your white privilege? Can you think of examples? Can you think of times where you feel like you've been put at a disproportionate advantage compared to other people?
If I may, I've been thinking a lot about my privilege and reflecting on it, especially over the last week or so. But even before then, just trying to reflect on the times that I feel like, whether or not I'm intentionally doing so, I am taking advantage of my privilege. I mean, I've been pulled over by police 5 times. I've gotten 0 tickets. Like that alone is an incredible example of privilege. I remember one time the cop said to me, I was speeding, and the cop said to me, I bet your mother would be furious with you if you came home with this ticket. And I said, yeah. He's like, all right, drive slow, and sent me home. And I don't think I even realized, it was a couple years ago. I drive better now. But I don't think I quite realized how much of my privilege played into that at the time. And it's something I have thought about a lot since, especially when so many of the high profile examples that we've seen, especially in the media, and just because they're videotaped, have involved the racial biases from police. I mean, I think of new examples of how I've checked my privilege essentially every day. That's a glaring example, but it comes a lot more subtly. And I think as a white person, especially now, I'm thinking of this as, all right, what can I do to A, acknowledge it more, and then B, try to not take advantage of it. Because I think the somewhat empowering feeling of being able to go out to the protests right now and not be nearly as worried for my safety, you know, approaching police officers in a testy situation and still being able to feel safe, when I know plenty of people of color out there who just from driving a car and police without their lights on behind them already start to not feel safe. So just trying A, not to take advantage of my privilege, but then B, trying to remove myself from situations where I feel like I would be taking advantage of it, which will only continue to perpetuate the disparities that come from it. So I guess where I'm trying to approach it.
Thank you, Todd. That was really well said. Anybody else?
I'll say something. I think I was telling you this in your response to your Instagram story, but a lot of white privilege is being able to not be consistently fronted with the idea of race. You know, 2 weeks ago, I wasn't sitting around thinking about what it meant to be white because I didn't have to. Like, nothing confronted my community or the way I live. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. There's been so many cases of police brutality caught on video, and in between, I think me and most white people, in that time in between, we didn't spend the entire time sitting and reflecting what it means to be white, how we can help better other communities. I see a lot of people who speak out, they're like, oh, white privilege isn't a thing. Like, I haven't gotten any privilege. It's not, there's no explicit white privilege. When people say that there's an economic privilege to being white, it's not like we're getting white stimulus checks. It's because we've been given so many different opportunities and avenues to fulfill our potential that other people aren't having. And I think that, again, someone said that this time is different, and I really hope that we don't let go of this anger and we keep this in passion to really sit and think about what we can do, and we really listen.
If I could add on to that, just like the idea of not having to even think about it. I grew up in small town Arizona, and I think I also threw this in the Instagram message, whereas it was not a part of my education to think of it's happening right now. Everything that the fear that is involved and everything, that was such a thing of the past, where year after year, even throughout high school, it was oh yeah, these are things that used to happen in our country, or maybe they happen in other places of the world. And so it was not maybe it was on my radar as being something that happened, but it wasn't real in the United States. And so that's been quite a wake-up call. And then I also wanted to add on to the second part, where it's also just in the cycle of generations, where this kind of goes back to the change question as well, where it's yeah, maybe legislation was put in place, but there was never a time where people were told they were wrong for thinking the way they did. So this huge group of white people had this thought in their head, and they were told, okay, so this isn't allowed anymore, but thoughts were still there. And then there's that cycle through generations that it's just never been disrupted.
Kind of similar to what Brenna was saying. I'm actually from, excuse me, I'm from Florida, and basically kind of grew up in a really small town. And what she's saying is completely true from where I was, because I would be hanging out with people in a completely fine situation, socializing, and then people would just say the N-word. something bad about Black people. And it was just so surprising to me, because what happens is, as she was saying, it's just a generational thing. The legislation has changed to try to make things a little bit more even. Obviously it's not enough, but it's just something where people are taught it at such a young age, and we need to like start changing that culture. And I wish that I started to say, speak out against that more. Obviously, growing up white, it was something where I was just kind of ignored it and tried to stay in the shadows about it, not expressing my opinion about it, for fear of, being seen as an outcast in that sense. And that's a big reason why I came out to USC, to kind of get away from that type of stuff. But it's definitely something where I wish that I'd spoken out more about it. And I really encourage anyone who in that situation to now try to speak out as much as they can.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll go Maggie and then.
Yeah, kind of to go off what Brenna was saying, like where I'm from in Austin, I knew that it was like had these deep racist roots, as most cities in the South do. But in my like very ignorant brain growing up, I was like learning about the fact that the city split east and west, and there's a highway in the middle, and like all the Black people live on the east side and none live on the west side. And even learning that like there were deeds in houses 50 years ago on the west side of town that said you can't sell your house to somebody of color. Like, so it was just like years and years and years, like no Black people could live in the west side of our city. Even my high school was like truly segregated. Like the top floor was all white kids and the bottom floor was all Black and Hispanic kids. And me just thinking like, oh, these are like the remnants of this system that just haven't been remedied yet. And thinking like, it's not actively happening, it just like hasn't been changed. And then obviously over longer than just the last week have like been realizing how wrong that is. But in the last week I've doing research in my own city and like how bad we rank in terms of police killings. Like Austin has like the least Black people in all of the major cities in Texas, yet like kill the most of them, like police kill the most of them. We have the most police killings in Texas and like the 13th in like the whole country, and all of these things that I just didn't know. And Austin's like touted as a super liberal city, but it's actually just for white people. And like this information I just didn't know was because of my privilege. But luckily is like starting to be informed now.
I think for me, I realized a lot of my, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I think I realized a lot of my privilege when I joined, because like I also, like a lot of you, I grew up in an area where like every 400 people in my high school, we had like one Black person. So it was like insanely small proportion. But then when I joined, I think I realized when I joined the dance community at USC, which is predominantly Asian. It's in LA, like the dance scene is predominantly Asian, but we're doing a style that's rooted in Black culture. And for me, I think I realized a lot of my white privilege when I like realized that in that community, I stood out because I was a white dancer, but there was no negatives that came with that. Like you could look at me in a group at a competition. It was like I was one of the only white people, but there's nothing bad about that. It was just like, oh, that's cool. She's also like part of this community. There's no like internal like bias or anything that prejudice that came with that the same way it would have if I were in a different situation where I was a minority but I was Black. And so it was very like eye-opening for me.
I kind of want to jump in on this. And one thing that like I think I've seen being Middle Eastern is that I think a lot of other people of color think that they are exempt from like, or like they can't be racist because they're also people of color. But I've definitely seen like those tendencies like within the Egyptian community and differences between like being a Black Egyptian versus being a non-Black Egyptian, and like those kinds of privileges that it brings up. So I think there are definitely privileges that like you can identify in like other minority groups that also echo a lot of what you guys have been saying about white privilege.
If I could go, kind of to go off that and kind of what Sharad was saying in the beginning with the model minority myth. Sharad, by the way, what's up, man? It's good to see you. So I have just been kind of figuring out like the term, like, you know, what model minority kind of means to us as the brown community. I grew up with the term. People have kept calling us, you know, we are the model minority. We are, you know, we are supposed to be better, right? But now I'm realizing this term is just rooted in something that's really racist and anti-black. So again, we're kind of in this weird spot as like South Asians that we have this, you know, we have this certain set of privilege that we should use to uplift other voices that aren't, you know, able to talk or able to speak because they're being oppressed. But again, I think it kind of goes back to talking with the people. Like before, we were able to make change on the legislative side. Obviously, it's protests, but it's a lot of the times it's like, you know, just talking. It's something as simple as like talking to your families. I've been having a lot of different conversations with my families. And you know, my parents are kind of, you know, they're getting on the older side. They're a little more conservative. But our community has a very bad history, or we have a very bad way of talking, frankly, just talking about Black people. I think we kind of have these conversations that our relationship to Black people is very, you know, it's not great. And so me and my sister, who are in this, you know, who are trying to, you know, talk to our parents and try to commit, like, you know, maybe we're not able to convince them of, you know, the systemic injustice all the way through. But we have to kind of sort of just, you know, change perception on the ground level first, before we can really, you know, kind of go off of that to something bigger. But yeah.
Going off of that, I can definitely relate with like being raised in like a Chinese family, and like there's a lot of like anti-Blackness centered around the entire like East Asian Chinese culture. And when I got back from like the airport like 2 days ago, I just had the conversation with my mom in the car. I was like, this can't wait anymore. So I just started talking to her about like Black Lives Matter and everything, and she was like more receptive than I expected. But she was like, what about like when Chinese people got attacked by Black people on the media when the pandemic first started because of the coronavirus? I was like, those are just like 3 instances that the media just like picked up, and like you can't just like focus the anti-Black movement, on like yourself, and like it's pretty selfish to be like selective about what you're anti-racist about. And then I thought it was really helpful because she like was like, okay, that makes sense. And then she also was like started talking about China, Hong Kong, like the Nationalist Party and Communist Party stuff from what she could relate to, and it was super helpful to talk about that because I think we have a different like relationship of oppression than our parents may know. So it was really helpful to bring in stories that like our parents knew, and like she like became more understanding. And like in high school and stuff, I went to a diverse school, but like my mom, like she kind of only valued like Black people if they had academic success to show, and like that was definitely problematic. But like I didn't know what to say about it back then. But now it's definitely time to like bring stuff up like that. And also like when I went back to China, like 2 years ago, this like kid who's like going to MIT for like CS was like, oh, I think the Ferguson like protests were also on TV at that time. And he was like, oh, is it true what they say about like Black people? Like, are they really dangerous? And I was just like so shook. I was like you're about to go to MIT for a master's degree, and you're asking this like crazy question. I was like, no, like that's definitely not true. And like I just think there's a lot of more conversations to be said. But yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt you, Waging, but I just sent the question in the chat. But I'm just curious, like, I don't know, by show of hands or whatever, like how many of you have had instances where you've been embarrassed by something prejudicial your parents said to one of your friends, to a stranger, to any of that? Right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. So I think that's a really important thing to talk about. How many times, like, no matter how many times that has happened, at the end of the day, right, they're still your parents. They love you. They, you know, given you life, blah, 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 all that. And those are all of the arguments that they're going to use to fight against you if you try and bring it up to them that whatever they're saying is incorrect. But I think this is a huge problem in our generation that falls on us, is to educate our parents, because they came from a different time or a different background, or especially, you know, people of color with immigrant parents, like they hold a lot of very prejudicial views from their home countries. And when it comes to, you know, raising children in America, they tend to, you know, pass those on or perpetuate, right, those stereotypes, or you know, and I see it within my own family. For those of you that don't know me super well, like I'm half Black and half Indian, right? So my dad is from Africa and my mom is Indian, but she was actually born and raised in the United States. So she's from Detroit, but she still holds these very old world, like Indian views, you know, at times, right? But when they decided to get married, their parents were super disapproving of it. My mom ended up getting like X'd out of her family completely, just like giant, all right, go leave and never come back until you have a grandchild. And my grandmother on my dad's side, still to this day, will say heinous shit about my mom, you know, my own mother, right? And now the second I try and speak up about that, you know, and say, hey, you really can't be saying stuff like that, right? It's the immediate confrontation is like, well, you don't respect me. I'm your parent. I'm your grandparent. You have, you know, don't make me feel dumb. You know, I know better than you, those kinds of things, right? So like, my question to you is, right, how, if at all, you know, in the past, how have you confronted that with your parents? What has your experience been like to anybody, you know, when you've tried to bring things like that up? Kind of similar to like what Wei Jing said, but has anybody else had that experience?
For me, I think it's been really disheartening. I have both white parents, and you know, they're good most of the time, but up and it'll be less than great. Embarrasses me in public or even at home, just like if we're watching the news or something. It always comes out as more of like they think I'm personally attacking them for their entire character and not necessarily just for this one aspect of their character, or even just one thing that they said. And I don't know if anybody else has experienced a similar thing, but I'm not even sure how to deal with it. It's like, I feel like I can approach it as descriptively, as fact-based as possible. And even still, in many cases, they're just not receptive to it. And it just ends the conversation. And I find that extremely frustrating, and it doesn't feel productive in any way.
Anybody else?
Yeah, you can go, Shad.
Yeah, so I've actually had, I guess, like pretty mixed experiences talking to my folks about race specifically. Both my parents are immigrants. My mom immigrated from Canada, so I don't really know if you can count that, but my dad immigrated from India, and they both have pretty like traditional, so to speak, like South Asian values towards like kind of this hardworking mentality. I think a lot of immigrants have this idea that like if you work hard enough, things will work out. And ultimately, kind of, I guess what we've been talking about throughout this entire conversation is that ultimately that's really not the truth in the United States. Like 400 plus years have gone by where generational inequity has basically summed up, and now where you've just gotten to this head like 2000, right? Like we started all of this like well before the 1600s, and people today are still facing ramifications of people's, I mean, I guess now very amoral choices. And ultimately, I guess speaking from the perspective of when I try to combat these issues, because both my parents are healthcare workers, so they both used to work in like low socioeconomic communities throughout Chicago. So I guess that's something specifically where they encountered like race on a very direct basis, but in their minds, it's like, oh, this isn't something that really is going to directly impact us because they're immigrants. They're educated immigrants at that, right? This whole model minority myth is based on the fact that somewhere between the mid 50s and early 70s, the United States started letting in a bunch of Asian and South Asian immigrants because they were very high educated people, or they had valuable skills to the United States that were considered to be like beneficial for the industrialization and furtherment of the country. But, you know, African-American people, Black people, Latino people, anybody who's been an immigrant from non-Asian and South Asian places have not been given that same, you know, benefit of the doubt. And I guess that's something that I've been trying to slowly start, you know, reaching towards my mom. And I definitely did try to reach towards my dad, but it's like very hard to come up with people who have gone through their entire life thinking, oh, I worked this hard to get to where I'm at. And like they've faced very, very hard times. Like I know like 2 generations ago, my grandfather and my dad's dad was a door-to-door salesman. And so I feel like for him, it was very difficult to understand that, people are facing the same thing, except way worse because it's 400 years of inequity instead of just generational, just poverty.
Thank you, Sean. No, I totally. Who was gonna go? Sorry, Drew. Did I cut you off?
No, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was just gonna say, like, in response to your question, I have mixed feelings about how my confrontations with my family's racism has gone. When it's a direct confrontation, it usually goes poorly because I get angry or one of them gets angry, and it doesn't really go anywhere. But outside of like those confrontations, when I give my family members, like my brother, my parents, things to read without like saying, this is specifically to correct your view on X or whatever, but just to like educate them. And particularly in times when emotions aren't highly charged. Like I think like last Christmas, I gave my brother the new Jim Crow and I told him, I want you to read it no matter what. And like, I'll send my parents like shorter articles because I know like they've barely read a book in their whole adult lives. And I mean like a book, but they'll read articles. And those things have been fairly successful because they always want to talk to me about something that they didn't realize from the article or something. Or even the movie like Just Mercy went a long way. We watched that the other night. Couldn't get them to read the book, but the movie I think did a pretty good job.
I think that's a really great point about the idea of like giving them information, helping them along that process, right? Is like, hey, check out this thing that you'll probably really enjoy. Even something as simple as like Black Panther, right? The fact that they see a Black superhero now, that's a huge step in the right direction. And, because that's just shattering their preconceived conception of like what that could be, right? Just Mercy is a fantastic book and a fantastic movie, and rather than, always coming at it with the perspective of like, I need to correct their behavior, why don't we offer them, say, hey, I'm watching this documentary, Dad, let's watch this documentary. And I say that because my friend David Lamy just put up, he said, get your parents to watch the documentary The 13th. It is the best documentary about anything that has to do with the justice system that's ever been created in history. And actually, I was going to talk about that when we went over resources as well, because it's on every movie list. Like if you ever look it up, like you should definitely watch it. It's on Netflix. It's amazing. It's very, very sad and a little bit, disheartening, but it's super, super important that we all understand these types of issues, And so I think that's great. Like figuring out ways to have your parents join in these activities, right? Or watch videos or listen to music is a really easy way to start to break down that barrier to be able to have some of these other questions. But I want to turn it to my follow-up question is to everybody, and I really would like to hear from everybody who's willing to participate that hasn't yet, if you feel like you do a good enough job calling out prejudice, not only with your parents, but with your friends, with your classmates, with professors, with teachers, or whatever, bosses even. Do you feel like you do a good enough job calling out that prejudice?
I'll speak to this a little bit. Can you hear me? Okay. I feel like I really struggled with this in the past because I'm like kind of a non-confrontational person to begin with. And then I felt like if I was gonna kind of like challenge someone with what they were saying, I wanted it to be like really well thought out. And I would take like so much time thinking about what I wanted to say to that person that I would just like kind of give up after a while because it's like, well, the moment has passed. And like, I wasn't like sticking with my gut on things like that. And that's something I'm trying to work on a lot more now. And it's because it's really something I never did in the past. I feel like I would do it like with my close friends. But I don't know if like those are even the people that you really need to do it with, because those people hear you talk like about your own views and about things that matter to you all the time. So like doing it with people like outside of my immediate circle was a big thing. And like just recently, something that I tried to do was I don't know if you guys know, the Center for the Political Future at USC released a statement on the George Floyd and the recent events, and it was really weak and cowardly and just terrible in my eyes. And me and Oscar worked on this together, but we both sent them a message because we both used to work there as well, just telling them how we felt and really asking them to reconsider their thoughts on that and to consider the complexities of the issue, and that like that was not our experience that we had there. And so hopefully, you know, I'm trying to speak out more on things that I see like that. But it's definitely been a struggle for me.
I feel like I grew up in a place that was like very white, but also like knew how to say the right thing and like seemed like to do the right thing because it was right outside San Francisco, but there wasn't like, so it was easy. It's easier for me because my parents know to say the right thing. They know, and I think they believe that they want to do the right thing too. So I never like am as often confronted with like ignorant comments because there's this training, I think, sometimes in Northern California where people know what to say, but it doesn't necessarily mean like actual change has happened in a really good way, because just because you know what to say doesn't mean the communities are diverse and doesn't mean the opportunities are equal. It just means you can feel good about yourself and pat yourself on the back for not being quote unquote racist. And so I think like throughout my entire life was like me growing up really young and believing like, oh, like things are really good. I've never like seen outward racism. But I also didn't know a lot of Black people or a lot of like Latino, like I knew a lot of white people who said the right thing. And so like throughout my life, it's just been slowly chipping at me like, wait, whoa, like this isn't right. This isn't what I thought it was. Like I still remember like being in like 6th grade and seeing a newspaper article of like a segregated prom in Texas and being like, holy fuck, what the hell is going on? And little things. And then when we got into like the end of middle school and high school and people would sing the N-word to songs, that was something that like was like, holy shit, no one said the wrong thing. Like everybody knew to say the right thing. And then here's an example where people aren't. And it really bothered me because I didn't know which isn't my, like, I don't know, it didn't hurt me because it's not my battle. But at the same time, I would get really angry and lash out at people in high school, but I wouldn't be able to get them to stop because my communication skills weren't the best on how to like express myself to be like, you can't do this. And then I did a semester in Argentina and it was worse because there I had a lot of friends who weren't from the US and they would say the N-word at me because they knew it made me angry and would make me like you can't say that, and they weren't from the States. And I think I try sometimes, and I do try to get people to not say the things that they're supposed to not say, and like, but I don't know how that's actually like, I feel like I haven't made any progress with it, I guess is what I mean. And that's, I think, something frustrating because it's like, not only like, you can't just say the message and be upset at what people are saying, but I think is like, for me, learning how to be an ally, it's not about just saying, hey, don't do this. It's about saying, hey, don't do this in a way that actually registers and actually creates change. And that's what I'm trying to learn how to do better. Like, yes, I can be a quote unquote ally and say the right things, but how do I say the right things and do the right things that create fundamental change? That's where I'm trying to figure it all out still and hopefully grow and get better. I guess that's my 2 cents. I don't know.
Unless anybody else wants to speak, I have a thing.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, word. Yeah, so I don't think that I have done enough kind of to call people out for this kind of thing, but I grew up in an area where it's predominantly white, but my family was in the convenience store business growing up. So in the lower class areas of my neighborhood, it's predominantly Black, and in the place like where I went to a private school, so my school was predominantly wealthier white people with like 2 Indians and 3 Black people at my entire high school. And I feel like, so I grew up a lot with all my friends outside of school being African American and struggling with a lot of different things, including like poverty and whatnot. But a lot of my high school friends were super conservative people, and they had they just had really racist views, and they were very open about it. And I was always kind of stuck in that middle ground because I was the convenience store kid at a very wealthy school, so I tried to just kind of fit in, and I let a lot of things kind of slide that, quite frankly, my friends outside of school would never have let slide, or would never have been cool with me allowing. And not until recently have I started, and I was a big part of that problem too, because I was one of those kind of people that would just kind of do whatever to fit in and just be cool with it and whatever. But now I feel like I've been trying to kind of call out some of those friends that I did let slide with a lot of things, and I've been met with quite a lot of backlash from them, because my area is very okay with being frankly racist. So like, it's just kind of something that I'm struggling with right now, to try to call people out and try to do the right thing and try to right some of the wrongs that I made by allowing things to slide a lot. But I actually kind of want to turn this into a question too, of what ways can we use to call people out, and not, I don't want to just cause arguments that are leading to nothing, but are like have good conversations, and how can we start those type of things to have like meaningful, progressive conversations to actually invoke some sort of change.
So I don't know if you're looking for an answer like from me specifically, but actually there's one person who, a former professor of mine, sent me a link privately of an entire document. It was an organization called Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, and they have an entire Google Doc about what to say and what not to say when having these very, very difficult conversations. So let me just share this link right now with everybody, and I believe you should be able to all view it. But it's the hard thing is, especially when it's like people our age, I feel like, is that it's almost unfathomable that they think that way in the first place. So your first immediate thought is like, wow, that kid must be stupid. They're not, especially if they also go to your university. If it's a top tier university, chances are they can hold their own, you know what I'm saying, academically. And that becomes a much more difficult challenge, because it goes from how do I teach a stupid person something to how do I get this very educated person who has educated themselves into the wrong opinion out of that opinion to then give them the new correct opinion that is respectable, respectful and accepting of all people, right? So there's the extra step in the process, that unlearning step that people tend to forget. With older people, sometimes it is a little bit more of like the, grandma, you can't say that anymore because, times have changed and you can't say Oriental or something like that, right? That's kind of the stereotypical example. But with people our age, right, when you're trying to have conversations with somebody, let's say it's the president of the campus Republicans, and they are coming off as, speaking from experience at USC, like that kid was awful. And he essentially, the set of views that a lot of these people take is like, okay, well, it's not my problem. Everyone should have a pull your own bootstraps, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of mentality. And that bleeds into the way that they view their policy stances and so on and so forth, right? But understanding that you can't come at that assuming that person is an idiot or has those views because they're dumb is something that we really have to register and like understand, give them the respect that they deserve to be able to unlearn and relearn information at a high level, and hit them with some of that high level information. Educate yourselves to the fullest extent to be able to come at them, not with just facts and figures, not just with an emotional appeal, but a well-crafted argument that really leaves them thinking like, wow, have I just been thinking wrong my entire life? And, the answer to that question may be like, yes, you know what I mean? But to answer your question, Kev, in a little more succinct fashion, like I think it starts with hitting them with the immediate, hey, stop. Whatever you're doing is offensive, and here's why it's offensive. Here's why other people might take offense at that. I'm not attacking you. Reassure them, right? I'm not attacking you personally. Obviously, we're still friends, but I need you to cease this behavior because it is bad faith for you. It's offensive to other people. And as your friend, I want the best for you. And this is not what's best for you. Yeah, I'm going to go. Shreese had something to say, and then Mari, I'll let you ask your question.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people brought up good points, especially I think a lot of us have grown up in predominantly white areas. And so I think from a young age, especially South Asians kind of like sit this middle ground, as many people have said. And two things. I think one, it's hardest to call out people when they're not overtly like being racist, like using the N-word or something, but it's like microaggressions, and these are people that like consider themselves to be liberal. Like all of us probably also need self-checking, right? But it's like people like us who we think, you know, share the same values and ideas about a lot of these issues, but then do things that you're like is very questionable, and you see the implications of it, but they're so, it's like so subtle and so, you know, kind of like covert that it's harder to call out those things. And when you do, it seems like the conversation is much more likely to become defensive, because they already think, you know, they've done the work and that they've like arrived here at like not being racist. And I think that also, we've talked a lot about like friends and family, but I think that especially extends into, you know, like academic spaces, policy spaces, professional spaces that all of us are in, because, you know, I'm guessing that like a lot of us aren't working in like super conservative like businesses or, you know, groups, but when you're kind of like I myself know that like I've had to like kind of code switch like when I enter certain spaces to kind of like fit a more white environment. And I know that that's problematic for me to do in the first place, but it's also, you know, me feeling like I need to do that because I don't see a lot of people that look like me, and definitely less people, you know, that are Black or like Indigenous. And so I think catching yourself when you yourself are like doing that code switching and might be, you know, on the side of people in professional environments, especially, you that can be harmful and like definitely, you know, maybe deterrent for other people of color to join those spaces. And then also, I think it's just like so hard to, you know, especially in like academic and policy spaces, to be like, you're actually thinking about this incorrectly, or like what you're doing, you know, would disincentivize other people of color from joining the space, or other Black people from joining the space, or what you just did, you know, like cutting off X person in this meeting, even though that's like the most common example, is like not okay. I think that's when you're like met with a lot more deflection and defensiveness, because oftentimes these people are working on like issues that we care about and are liberal. So at least for me, that's like where I've had a lot more, surprisingly, pushback time and time again, than just frankly telling someone that I know, you know, might be voting Republican or something, that what they're saying is racist, because maybe you get into a heated argument with them, but like you have a lot of facts to back up your point, but it's harder to convince the people that you think are already like allies, quote unquote, to kind of like do that reflection.
Can I jump in? Oh, hello. Oh, you're muted, Marcus.
Somebody else was raising their hand as
Oh,
well, right? But so we'll go Maria and then Tatiana.
Yeah, mine's pretty brief, but with me, the biggest thing I've struggled with is I'm from North Dakota, which is like the south of the North. It is a very conservative place, right up at the top of the country. And so I grew up, we had a couple of Black kids at my school, not a whole lot, and it really hurt growing up because I would go to places and people would say the N-word during songs, and it was like when you try to tell your white friends not to say the N-word when you're white, and then they come at you with, oh, my Black friends don't care, like like I've struggled to make that argument, and like that's where that's the wall that I keep hitting with my friends here, because especially now that we're in college, there are a lot more Black people because there's a lot of athletes that come to University of North Dakota, and so they're even more like in this mentality of like, oh, well, my Black friends don't care, so like why should I, like it's not wrong. Because growing up, like the kids who went to my high school, I don't know if they felt I'm sure they felt uncomfortable saying something, because it was like 1 or 2 per grade. Like they're not exactly surrounded by people that will like, that they know for sure will have their back on that. And so it's like this ingrained mentality of like, okay, well, like it's never been an issue before, why is it an issue now? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. It was an issue before, and now people's perspectives are changing. That it's like now it's just like this is it, and it needs to change, right? People's behavior needs to change. Thanks.
I was talking with my friend earlier about the 2016 election, and like when that happened, I just unfollowed everyone from my high school that was a Trump supporter. But now that a lot of people are posting about Black Lives Matter, my Instagram kind of feels like an echo chamber because everyone who I follow for the most part like agrees with me, which I kind of wish it wasn't because I feel like my voice would have more impact if I was able to reach an audience of people who don't agree with me.
Yeah, I felt that same way maybe 2 years ago, and I've since gotten off of social media almost entirely, uh, for better or for worse. I think one of the great things about it is that it's really forced me into having conversations with people who I really, really disagree with. Because unlike on social media, you can't just stalk them a little bit and find out how bad they are or how good they are. But at the same time, I feel often guilty that I'm not keeping up with things through social media. So it's put a bit of pressure on me at times to keep up and make an intentional effort to reach out and find different sources for things and really learn about what's going on. Just thought I'd add that there, and maybe it's worth, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed in an echo chamber. I found it like really helpful for my mental health to just step back for like a couple weeks, and it feels really good. So would recommend.
Yeah, I actually kind of want to talk about that for a sec. This idea of like the social media echo chamber. So just by like show of hands or thumbs up or whatever, like how many of you also agree with that? That you feel like your social media is an echo chamber, where you just everyone already agrees with you and you're really not being challenged by anything. Okay, and it's designed that way, right? You friends your friends, and the people you're already friends with tend to have similar views because you want to feel comfortable around your friends, right? And so that's where I think is the really hard next step, is figuring out how do we go beyond social media to reach people that are not in this little echo chamber of people, right? It's like, how do we have a more public discussion about this? Obviously social media can, like if you put up videos or have people repost your things, and especially with Instagram, because it is so like just person to person, I think it's hard, right? Twitter has the potential like your tweets to go viral, but that's just a squawk box of 160 characters. You know what I mean? What I really think needs to happen is people need to transition away from this instant consumption social media and more towards meaningful content, right? We're talking about, we've mentioned books and podcasts and these things and that thing, right? And figuring out how to best spend your time online to reach, either educate yourself to be able to encounter things and challenge them in person, or to better reach a more public audience, right? Like commenting on a New York, if any of you have read New York Times like articles, especially op-eds, if you go through that comment section, like people have some crazy, crazy opinions, and that can also feel like shouting into the squawk box at times. But at least, it's not just because of some random picture that somebody put up, or, one tweet from some kid at your high school. It's like an article that hopefully you can have discussions about, right? And doing more things like this. If you know people that are less than, perfect when it comes to being prejudicial or biased, and we have these spaces set up, bringing those people, forcing them to come in, and just sit down and listen. They don't even need to necessarily like speak. You know what I'm saying? So when we do another one of these, having somebody else that needs this come and sit down and listen, that's how we're going to start to change people's minds, right? Everybody has been saying some amazing things and has had some amazing points, right? But it really boils down to like, how do we force the interaction between people on one side and people on the other side? And it's not going to be through commenting catty comments on Instagram posts. It's not going to be reposting, a story from a prominent Black author. It's not going to be these things. It's going to be things like this, right? In-person communication. It's going to be every single day living your life, knowing that you need to step up and live a certain way that respects, all people, and you need to defend that position with other people. I'm going to let Lami hop in real quick because I'm on a preachy rant, but go for it, Dave.
What's good? What's up, guys? This is dope. This is really dope conversation. I really been trying to tell people, and it's like in this mentality where it's like it's that hive mentality, and kind of like I saw it like a big thing was when I don't know if you remember when Ben Shapiro came to campus, and it was this whole thing, and it was this whole rally, and some of us went inside, and then a lot of people were rallying outside. But I went back recently and I went on YouTube to watch a couple of videos of people like right-wing like YouTubers going to the rallies to like, ask questions and to try to start some shit or whatever. But they were asking questions to like people at the rallies, and it's like asking them, okay, well, what did Ben Shapiro say that's so wrong? Like this whole thing of like he's saying hate speech and all that stuff. So they're just asking what did he say? And nobody could respond. And I felt like for me, that was kind of embarrassing because it's like, number one, you have to at least educate yourself. And that's one of the biggest things for me is I've always been, the biggest things and the biggest impact y'all can make as white people and non-Black people is just educating yourself. And then of course, like, checking on other people, or checking other people. But you kind of have this, I heard one of you guys say, like, sometimes you feel like a non-confrontational person, you don't really know quite what to say. And I feel like the more I've just educated myself on different news, just felt so much more comfortable with, talking back to people. And, the whole thing about facts don't care about your feelings. Ben Shapiro thing. But it's like, this kind of hive mentality of like, well, everybody's saying this, but we have no saying. Instead, why not have some kind of discourse, And I think that's a big thing is like, I personally don't agree with just unfriending, unless it's like I've been going on Facebook and like my parents, the older like people that, I feel like their minds probably aren't going to change. I've been unfriending, but like when it comes to people my age or people who are still growing and learning, I definitely wouldn't want to unfriend them. Because I feel like that's an opportunity to be able to teach. And if I can educate myself more, then, I can just, it's so much easier to explain, no, this is this, this is why this, or somebody's like, well, Black on Black violence or whatever, like, I'm sure y'all feel like when people say that it's wrong, but you might not exactly know how to respond to that, So I feel like it's a big thing, educating yourselves and kind of having healthy dialogue and conversation, I feel like is the best way to actually change people's minds. So that's all I was going to say. And also I feel like another thing too is one thought that I had from before. I feel like, and this is, sometimes it's hard because, I'm sure y'all probably feel like you hear different things from Black people on what's correct, what's not correct. So that might be a struggle. So for me, when it comes to the term people of color, I feel like that also kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit, just because there's so many different issues. Like the issues we're dealing with right now are Black issues, right? And then there's so many other issues. Like I've been learning so much, I've been trying to educate myself on Native American issues, like Indigenous issues, which is like insane when you think about how, we've been lied to in the textbooks and history about all of that. And so I just feel like when it comes to different, Hispanic people, Asian, there's so many different groups of people, and everybody has their own issues. And kind of, if you can, then you can, just kind of learn about different things and, not try to group everybody together. But that's pretty much.
Great, David. Thank you. I think to David's point, education comes first. You have to know what you're talking about before you can tell somebody else whether or not what they're doing is right.
That's what I just said. Yeah, one last thing. If you guys, I'll see if I can find the link and drop it.
I know some of you probably know about Victor McElhaney. He was a USC student who died, and he was one of my close friends. He was one of the people that were inside the rally when Ben Shapiro came, not in the rally, inside the space in Bovard when Ben Shapiro came, and asked him a question. And, they actually had a really like healthy dialogue on different things. And so I would highly suggest you listen. It's on YouTube, so you can watch what Vic had to say, because there's a lot of things too that came when you're talking about, equality and what are actual things. It's one thing to say, yeah, definitely there's no equality between, white people and black people or minorities or whatever it is, and actual information. I think you could learn some stuff from even what Vic was saying. He's bringing up a lot of things between, a lot of banks will give that they'll call it mud loans. That's kind of like, what else the racist term for it, but they'll give undesirable loans to black people because they feel like they won't have, returns on them. That's one example of little kind of institutionalized racist type of things that people go through, where you really see, okay, like here's some actual facts and evidence of inequality, of opportunity. So I'll drop the link, but that's a really good video.
And then
yeah, Carly, go for it.
Oh, and then just to kind of like add on to that, definitely about like, I don't really like to speak before I think about stuff. And I definitely like, if I was more educated, I would definitely have a better response to stuff and everything like that. And like, I spent 2 months in Guatemala, and definitely after like seeing the experience and hearing stories about like immigrants coming to the US, I definitely feel more confident like speaking up to my family, like grandparents and stuff, about like immigrants and that type of stuff. So I definitely just really want to educate myself about this issue. And thank you, Marcus, for holding this.
Of course. And I don't want to take up too much of anybody's time. So we're going to talk about resources in a second, because this is fantastic. The idea of education and all that. I'm going to let Professor Source speak real quick, and then I'll do my little ending spiel.
Hi, guys. Thanks for letting me observe this. You all are amazing. Marcus, you're amazing for organizing this. And I haven't wanted to say anything because how open you all are being in this discussion is really so heartening to me. But I did wanted to speak a little bit, because I was hearing a lot of commonalities, Lemmy, that you also noted about people who are feeling like maybe I want to speak up, but I don't know how. And you guys hit the nose on the head with education. I just want to frame it a little bit in terms of like what education can be. So there's education that is read the books, right? Read these amazing books that Marcus is going to talk about, listen to the podcast, all of these things. But one of the best ways to feel comfortable engaging in these conversations is by listening to others who are making these arguments well. So if you get a chance to attend a virtual Black Lives Matter movement, attend and listen. Listening is one of the strongest tools that we have. It's one of the most important ones. And as you immerse yourself and see like, those people are winning these arguments, they're coming armed with receipts and facts. And this is how they're framing it when someone comes at them with the question of, but what about the violence? Or someone comes at the question of, okay, but what about Black on Black violence? Or if someone comes at them with the question of like, but is it systemic? Everybody has a chance. And you see how all of these people are putting together their own argument, right? And as you immerse yourselves in listening, you're gonna become emboldened, kind of, Carla, as you're describing, of once you have this like fine-grained understanding. So that's part of it. Listening is part of the education. Another part is a lot of talk about having really hard conversations with family. No one masters this, right? Like I'm an adult, I'm a professor at USC, and I turn into a teenager around my parents. Like it's really, really hard to engage with emotional conversations like that. And one of the things I think that document does really well is try and think about it as coming to it from an emotional standpoint, as I feel angry when I see this happening in the street. I feel scared when I go out into the street with my friends, and coming at it from your own emotional perspective can help ease some of that combativeness that you feel, especially with your family, who feel like they're personally attacking you. So that's number two. And then the third thing is on this issue of echo chambers. I know, Marcus, you mentioned this as we were emailing, and it's really, really hard. And I would say there's two different types of echo chambers here, right? One is like you're preaching to the choir, like anything you say you feel is like gonna bounce off people who already feel the same thing. So, and I think you're right, maybe it's not social media that is the place, the outlet for that. And I would highly, highly recommend generations and generations and generations of activists have had these tough conversations and have worked to reach across the line. Find an organization, a grassroots organization near you, and to get out of that bubble, go find people who share your values and see how they're reaching across the line. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can do it with camaraderie around you and in person. And the other side of this echo chamber is in surrounding yourself with people who are just in your friend group, you're also probably surrounding yourself with people who look like you, right? And which means you don't learn how to code switch when other people are learning how to code switch. You don't learn the ways that Black people adapt culturally to white culture in the workplace because you as a white person are not adapting to that and you're not seeing it in your sphere. So I would challenge you to think about, who are can you name 3 Black journalists that you follow on your social media, right? If you can't, follow them and just look at what they're writing, really follow them as journalists. Can you name 3 influential Black authors that have had an impact on how you think about things? If the names don't come to mind immediately, that's part of getting out of your echo chamber too, right? It's about surrounding yourself with ideas that aren't necessarily immediately in front of you. And I think one of the hardest things about this work is that all of us right now want to demonstrate outwardly that we're doing it, right? But that work about getting out of your echo chamber, about following other people, is often for those of us, especially who are non-white, or non-Black, who are white, it's not visible. And you know what? Yeah, it's not visible, and that's part of doing the work. And you just accept that this isn't the time for you to be visible. It's the time for you to be in the background doing the work. And then having done that work, when the chance comes for you to step up and someone says that comment or that opportunity presents itself to have your conversation with your mom or your grandpa, you're gonna come to play and you're gonna feel confident doing it. So I just wanted to say those few things about this topic of education, and thank you guys so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation, and you're all fantastic.
Thank you, Professor. I'd like to echo that statement. Thank you all for coming again. So fun news is there will be another one. We're going to talk about microaggressions, aggressions, and the N-word. So it's going to be super fun. And we're working on getting some other people. Actually, there might be a couple other people who want to talk before I wrap it up. So I'll let David talk, and then Marcus, if you want to talk, go for it.
Cool. I was just gonna add one more thing. That was really dope. Thank you for sharing. But yeah, one thing I heard the question earlier, and you guys were talking about kind of like the spaces, especially like in the row, and kind of like feeling, is this segregated and stuff like that. So I feel like there's a difference between like cultural differences, and the station my uncle a few years ago, and kind of what he was, sometimes you have to come to this country and try to assimilate into, white culture to be able to be accepted, And I feel like a lot of the ideas, like when Black people come into white spaces in college or like the professional world or whatever it is, you feel like, oh, it's segregation, it's diversity, it's good, but then you kind of wonder why there's only like one Black person or two Black people or whatever it is. And so like diversity as like a term, I read this from somebody, I wish I remember her name on Twitter. She was a journalist, but she was talking about how diversity is a term for white people, like diversity is like this idea where you have like a professional, like your company or whatever, you have a company and you want to look better and feel like you're more accepting. So you accept like 1 or 2 or 3 Black employees, or colleges that, with affirmative action, like you have to, get a certain quota of Black people or of minorities. And so that's kind of, the idea of diversity. And we're kind of like, now we're at the perfect spot, kind of in this place with this struggle to kind of shift the narrative and kind of change the fight, because now we're seeing, well, everybody deserves to be equal. It's not like when we're back in the 50s and 60s, we're just, the actual segregation is like, no, people want to be able to actually eat at places where white people are eating. Like obviously right now we're not dealing with that, but it's a different type and it's a lot more subtle. So that was kind of the idea, like especially when it comes to the row, it's like, well, Black people, there are certain Black people that might not want to join a white fraternity or a white sorority, and that's cool, as long as we make sure that when people are at those spaces or you're throwing parties or whatever it is, everybody is accepted, And I remember from going, especially my freshman year, and I would be going to parties, me as a Black man, especially looking like an athlete, I was cool, like I'm cool in these parties and these spaces, because there's almost this pedestal or like fetishization or whatever that word is, of like, of being a Black guy. But I was seeing Black women being dogged out all the time, or Black women being turned away from parties because the guys were saying, oh, you guys don't look good enough or whatever it is, So I feel like it's when those things start to come up, that's when you can really start to fight and to speak up, but not necessarily always having to question, well, why don't we have more Black people trying to join these spaces, because it as well as just there's just cultural differences, and that's okay, so that's all I was going to say.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I really appreciate that point. Like Black people definitely, have their own prerogative to join like white frats or whatever, but in the time and place where we arrive in those spaces, it still needs to be accepting regardless, because it should just be an accepting place. You know what I mean? And I really respect that point of view. Marcus, go for it. And then I'm gonna have some like little final words so people can leave if they want to leave. But then anybody that wants to say, I'll leave the Zoom
open. Yeah, I didn't write anything down and prepare. I guess I prepare like every day of my life. But 2 things. Like, I grew up low income household, drug riddled household, grew up with minorities, all that. But what really made me understand everything was in college, when I really dug deep on the civil rights movement and what happened at that time. And I feel like part of the reason, because all we want to do is to change those people who have like this strict outlook on life, like a lot of Trump supporters have it. We want to change that narrative. For me personally, like learning about COINTELPRO, learning about the Controlled Substances Act that puts marijuana as more dangerous than cocaine and fentanyl, you know what I'm saying, because Black people used it to keep them in jail for longer. Learning these things helps us understand why things are the way they are now. Things don't happen overnight. It's been, over 50 years since the civil rights movement, and we're out here protesting and police are still killing Black people. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. These things happen over centuries. We look at history, we don't read a week, you know what I'm saying? We're reading big chunks. And so I think that is a big thing in knowing how we got to this point, especially in America, what America has done, actual legislation that was passed, to discriminate against Black people. Like, we need to really know that. And I feel like that is a part of this whole education. I popped in kind of late, but I got in on that conversation. In terms of education, I think that's something that would be good to help people really understand, because, when you never experience it, you don't have any minority friends. Like, how are you supposed to understand? How are you supposed to have that empathy like it's hard. It's really hard. Like if I didn't grow up where I grew up, I would never understand like how I understand. So it's like, it's hard to get to that point, which is why you have to empathize with them and understand where they came from and who their parents were and what they were teaching them when they were kids. You know, racism isn't, you're not born with it, you're taught it. You know, that's what you see all the signs at the protests and whatnot. But my second point, I don't know if this applies to anybody else in here, but someone like me, I'm not black, you know, but my uncle was black and he lived with me growing up. My whole, like, I'm so influenced by black culture from the way I walk, the way I talk, my music I listen to, the clothes I wear, everything is influenced by black culture. That's why, like, gets me really worked up, like, talking about this stuff. And I'm sure, like everyone else, you wake up in the morning, can barely sleep because all this happens. Like, it's frustrating, you know what I'm saying? And I think people like me, you know, who aren't black but have created their whole life off of black culture, we can't like go away from this. If you follow me on Instagram, you already heard me talking about this. Like, it's white privilege to be able to get off of social media and be good and not worry about it no more. And don't get me wrong, I understand that it gets hard and you need to take mental health breaks and make sure you're good. You're going to be counterproductive, you know what I'm saying? But someone like me, like, I can't run away from the war. What that makes me the biggest coward in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like, someone like me who has used so much of that culture and I'm not black, I can't run away from it. And I would expect that from all white people, but especially people like me, you know what I'm saying? And yeah, mainly just not getting frustrated too. That I want to put that in. Like, I took to Facebook. I didn't get real crazy with what I was saying, but you know, it was definitely words of frustration. And I'm always talking about, I'm that social activist talking to my roommates about all these problems at random times. But like, when this stuff happens, obviously that's why we got the protests and the riots and this and that, like, because all this frustration builds up. And, you know, I learned, like, you can't fight fire with fire. And I seen that, like, my frustration, how I put it out. Everyone on my side is like, yeah. On our side, you know, fighting the good fight, everyone's like, yeah, Mark is like truth, facts. But the people who I'm really trying to convince are like, oh, okay, I'm not even going to listen to what you have to say. And I have a lot of good stuff to say, but I let my frustration get the best of me. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's key. And not letting it get you upset when someone doesn't want to conform and agree with you. Like, that it's a gradual process, like I'm saying. It's going to take a long time. So I know we're all frustrated. I know we're all angry, sad, all these emotions. But I think learning how to just be calm and not let your emotions get the best of you, having emotional intelligence, is going to, like, really, really, really keep us going forward. You know what I'm saying? They want us to start tripping at the protest. They want that. That's what they want, to all this bad stuff to happen, and police and us fighting and looting. They want that to happen, you know? So, like, we can't give them that. You know what I'm saying? We won't, and I know we won't give them that. And I don't know, I'm getting a little worked up. I just got off work, just walked 2 miles home, so I'm getting a little hyphy right now. But yeah, I gave my little 2 cents. I hope y'all appreciated it.
And I know we're running low on time, but just wanted to say, like, I agree with everything that was just said. And I think that's another way to get out of our echo chamber and, like, confront beliefs that we don't necessarily hold. I think we're at a place where there needs to be radical change into, like, the systems that have been built. Because if you learn about the histories, they're built to criminalize people of color. Like, there can be no way that those systems can keep going. So I think just educating yourselves on resources that I'm sure are in the list that Marcus has put in the chat. And I don't think allyship has to be individual. I think we should ally with other grassroots organizations that are led by women of color or incarcerated families. They're led by people who have directly experienced some of these prejudices. I think that's a great way that we can do to get out of our echo chamber.
Awesome. Thank you, Kavisha. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, David. Thank you to everybody who's spoken today. I really, 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 really appreciate everybody coming out here today. But I just hope that praise is not given too soon. Now is the time that is the educate yourself part, right? It's not up to your Black friends. It's not up to other people. It's not up to teachers. It's not up to whatever. It's up to you. It's all down to you, right? How do you want to spend your time, right? We're in the middle of a quarantine. Y'all can't even go anywhere. Open a new book, watch a new movie, learn about other videos. There are YouTube channels, there are podcasts, there are radio shows, even in music, music lists, plenty of, Spotify alone has like a bajillion, Black Power, Black Lives Matter, these types of playlists, right? But don't just listen to the music, right? If you're listening to a James Brown song, you have to understand how influential James Brown was as a person, right? Go that extra step further. Not only, and then there's two other things I wanted to say. One, to be an ally, you do not have to hijack the mission or objectives or voices of people of color. You don't have to constantly assume that you have to speak for them, right? We have our own voices where we can say our own things, right? Instead of, oh, I'm echoing your sentiment and writing my own new thing and is now being validated because I'm a white person, right? Why don't you just retweet the thing the Black person said, right? Support your friends that are trying to speak on this issue from experience before you speak on it as a person from the outside. That boils down to this one very key distinction that really bothers me when people say it, is people say, I stand with and for you. We don't need anybody to stand for us. I understand this is a taxing journey, right? But we signed up for this. Well, technically, no, we didn't. But either way, we're in it. You know what I'm saying? We need people to stand with us. I respect that. We're here together as a group, as a team, as a community on March. You know what I'm saying? But don't assume that an argument or a statement is more validated by your voice than from somebody else's voice. You know what I'm saying? So it's a support mechanism rather than a taking over of their voice. You know what I'm saying? So what does that mean? When it really boils down to it, is like, if you're at a party and it's all white people and you see somebody say something racist, that's a time where you can stand for somebody because they're not physically there to stand up for themselves. You know what I'm saying? But if you're in a room full of people having a discussion about this and somebody asks a question about past experience and you say something that doesn't have to relate to past experience because you wanted to say something and feel like you're contributing, that's not the right way to go about it. You know what I'm saying? So as long as that makes sense and that we all have the common understanding that it's on each of us to educate ourselves on the history of the past. And I understand how difficult that is. LA 92, right? The Watts riots, the Rodney King riots, like in the 90s, that's a part of living LA history, And we don't even teach, that at least I didn't have that in history in high school, right? Recognize that our education before now was incomplete and supplement that with resources that are available now. You know what I'm saying? So I sent a resource link. It is the Let's Talk About Race, Educate Yourself starter pack. If you click on it, it goes to a Google Doc. Everybody can edit it because this is intended to be a living document. Add your own resources in the different categories. If most of it, like books and movies, we kind of got unlocked just because it's a bunch of lists. But I would really appreciate if everyone could read. It's actually a Vox article, which I don't love Vox, but it's called Professor Ibram X. Kendi on why it's not enough to admit when you're being racist. It's the idea that I was talking about. There's a difference between not being racist and being an anti-racist, right? And that whole article talks about that. There's obviously have to make sure that we know where to donate, where to petition, what causes, need money, that type of thing. That's the first thing, right? There's at least 150 different books in the first 6 book lists. There's 25 movies and TV shows, 30 podcasts, and a bunch of people to start following on social media. Just like Professor Schwartz said, follow those people and then actually pay attention to what they have to say. Pay attention to what your friends have to say, what your family has to say, and approach every situation with kindness and acceptance in your heart. And this shouldn't be that hard. It may take a while, but we got to start putting in the work. You know what I'm saying? Those are kind of my ending words. I want to make sure that other people, if they want to stick around for any last questions, can do that. But I wanted to make sure I got that resource link out so that people that need to go can go. But if anyone wants to stick around, unfortunately, I actually also have another meeting at 6 o'clock. so I'm gonna have to sign off in 20 minutes anyways. But thank you. I literally cannot thank all of you enough for participating, for staying through the whole thing and having such amazing perspectives and being honest and sharing with me in this moment. I look forward to the next one. The date is TBD. We're trying to do something a little more special, a little more curated.